So in this video, I want to go through the basics of setting up a Plumber server on DigitalOcean. Now, if you're not familiar, DigitalOcean is a cloud hosting provider. You can host a variety of different servers here for pretty cheaply, and they're known for being quite a bit simpler than some of the other alternatives, so it's a great place to get started if you're new to this stuff. So one of the first things we're going to do at the time of this recording in April of 2017, some of the features that we're going to look at in Plumber are not available on the CRAN version. So we're going to use DevTools. If you don't have the DevTools package, you can just install that from CRAN. And then we're going to install from GitHub the package TrestleTech/Plumber. And that will get you the latest development version of Plumber, which includes these functions that we're going to be using today. So now, once that's done, I can go ahead and load Plumber into my session. And now I'm going to be able to say Plumber, well actually I don't even need that. I can do DigitalOcean underscore provision. So this is do_provision. And you can see that this takes two arguments. First of all, you can take a droplet, which if you already have a droplet that you want to provision, then you can provide it here. In this case, we don't have one, so we're just going to leave this blank. And then secondly, you can say whether or not you want the unstable version of Plumber. So this is if you want to install Plumber from CRAN or if you want the unstable version. For our purposes, we actually do want the latest and greatest, so we're going to install the unstable version. So now I'm going to run do provision unstable true. It's giving me a warning that it's actually spinning up a server, and that does cost me money. If you haven't ever done this before, it'll actually prompt you to authenticate with DigitalOcean and kind of grant the appropriate permissions for them to be able to spin up a server on your behalf. So we've already got that going, and so let me go ahead and reload this page. And you'll see here that we have this new server that's spinning up. And eventually you'll see some graphs here on like CPU and disk I/O and different usage on your server. None of this is going to be terribly important to us. The only real button that you might need here would be this destroy tag, which once you're done with the server, go ahead and destroy it, because as long as the server is online, you are going to be charged for it. So make sure that you keep an eye on that. So now it's going to run through and it's going to go ahead and first of all set up the server. So it's installing, or it's provisioning the server, it's making the server exist for us. And then what it's going to do now is it's going to perform a variety of different actions, including installing R, a recent version of R. It's going to install Plumber for us. It's going to install some necessary infrastructure and wiring on the server that will allow us to actually host Plumber reliably as a service. So we don't have to, every time we reboot it, we don't have to restart Plumber or anything like that. That's all going to work for us. So this should be a pretty reliable way for us to host Plumber. So this will take a few minutes to actually go through and install R and all the dependencies that you actually need here. But if you just let this run, after a few minutes you should end up with a server that's running Plumber, and we'll come back and we'll talk about how you get into the server and what you're going to do with it from there. Alright, so in real life that took 5 or 10 minutes to complete that whole process, but you should now be seeing this screen where we've actually finished up, and you're sitting at a console here where you're ready to accept new commands. So what's happened here is we actually set up the server in DigitalOcean. So we're running this cloud server that's now running Plumber. And the fact that this completed successfully means that everything was installed that we needed. So what you can do now is you can access this machine at this IP address that DigitalOcean assigns to you. And you can just copy and paste that in, and hopefully if you're watching this video in the future, you'll see a prettier page than this, but for now this is what I have. So what this actually is, so this page is served by Plumber, and so the fact that you're seeing this page when you visit your server means that R was installed properly, Plumber was installed properly. There's a web server called Nginx that we use to proxy between Plumber and in the browsers. All of this is set up correctly in order for you to see this page. So everything's working as it should, and so this is a good sign. So if you're unfamiliar with cloud services and SSH and different things like that, it may be worth kind of taking a step back to get a little bit more familiar with some of those things, and DigitalOcean has some really great resources to help you with that. But I'm going to assume that you have at least basic familiarity with some of these concepts as we go. So what you're going to do is you're going to SSH into this server, just using that IP address that was given, using the root user. That's the default username for Ubuntu. It'll ask you if you want to accept this key. You say yes, and you're in. I'm hand-waving over some complexity here. So if this is your first time using DigitalOcean, they're going to ask you to set up some SSH keys and different pieces that need to be set up before you can actually set up the server. We actually use the Analog C package, which was developed by Scott Chamberlain, one of the people behind our OpenSci, which is a great project if you haven't heard about it yet. So it may be worth your while to actually go through and take a look at some of the Analog C documentation, because they go through how to set up droplets, how to authenticate into these droplets, and even some bits around SSH here, and managing your SSH keys. So if this is unfamiliar to you or it's not going as smoothly as I'm showing, then it may be worth your while to kind of take a look at some of those docs. But eventually, once you have the SSH keys set up right and you pointed at the right IP address, then you should actually be into your server. And so this, as you can see, I'm actually running my server here. There are a couple of useful commands that I'll point out here. And again, if you're unfamiliar with Ubuntu or with Linux as a whole, I'm not going to be able to cover all of that here. But let me just show you a couple of interesting commands. So the first one is that we actually have a Plumber service that we define that actually makes sure that Plumber is online. So if the R process ever crashes, it restarts it for you. And then also when the machine boots, it makes sure that Plumber is up and running when the machine boots. And so to manage that, you're using a service called systemd, and the command is systemcontrol or systemctl. And we can run systemctl status Plumber, and that'll show you kind of some basic information about your Plumber service. And so right now you can see it's active, it's running. You can see even kind of a preview of some of the logs that are associated, the most recent logs on the service. And so it looks like everything's running well here. If you ever have problems and you want to update it, you can do system control restart Plumber, and that will actually restart the Plumber service for you. So you can see that it was stopped and then started, and now we're back up and running again. And this is all actually based on a file that's stored at var plumber hello.r. So this is kind of the entry point to everything that's automatically provisioned for Plumber on the server. And so right now you can see that we only have one endpoint defined. It's the get for the root URL. It returns an HTML page that just says Plumber's alive, and that's what you saw here in the browser. So this is what our Plumber service is right now, but obviously you should extend this and kind of define your own API, which would then be available right here. So, all right, so we've got our Plumber service. One other useful command that I'll point out here, you can run another associated command, which is called journal control or journalctl. And if you do journalctl-u for unit, it's lowercase, and then Plumber, that'll actually show you the logs. You can actually query for the logs associated with Plumber, so you can get more than what you get in the status preview. And actually, if you add the -f command, then that'll actually stream the logs back. And so as you do different things in Plumber, if you have your Plumber service set up to log interesting information, all of that's just going to appear right here in real time. It'll just feed in to your console as you're watching it. So this is kind of a nice way if you're debugging it or monitoring your Plumber service while it's running live in production. Can be a helpful command to do that. So other than that, I mean, I won't go into the details here about the different pieces that are configured, but you can look in the DO provision documentation for kind of some of the information about the different services that we configure. I mentioned Nginx, we install a firewall by default, we set up a swap file. You can see here some information on system control and journal control. We have that reference to var Plumber, and then obviously we have R and Plumber installed as well. So we can actually open up R, and if your Plumber service is going to, or your Plumber API is going to depend on other packages that you don't have yet, you can go ahead and install those on the server and make those available so that when Plumber goes to run, those packages will be available as well. So you can just use R like you would anywhere else here. And you can even, if you're wanting to do more interactive development on the service, I'd recommend installing RStudio Server on this server itself. And that would allow you then to go in, port 8787 is the default, and then you would actually be able to access RStudio Server on this server and kind of interact with it that way. So that may be a nicer way for you to kind of iteratively work on your API and be able to get kind of immediate feedback about what's going on that real server, as it's going to exist in production. So basically, at this point, that is just about everything that you need to know about kind of configuring a basic Plumber server using just basic HTTP access and setting it up in kind of a production way such that the service is going to automatically be started and managed for you. If you want to do different things like and resize the server to do something a little bit beefier, if you've got some more computationally intense or larger data that you need to analyze, you're capable of doing that as well. You can kind of bump up the specs for your server here. So all of that should be available to you for you to explore, and I'd encourage you to go kind of take a look at the different pieces here, and you can kind of delve as deeply as you want to in any of these aspects and learn more.